For most healthy adults, the RDI of potassium is about 2,600 milligrams for women and 3,400 milligrams for men. But if you have chronic kidney disease, it's a whole different story. Depending on your CKD stage, potassium intake usually needs to be limited to around 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams a day. And in some more advanced stages, especially if you're not on dialysis, doctors may even ask you to go below 2,000 milligrams to protect your kidneys and heart from high potassium levels. So today, we'll tell you about some vegetables that might be destroying your kidneys' health. We'll also share a few tricks to lower their potassium content. Let's get started with number 1 on our list: butternut squash. Technically, it's a fruit, but most people cook it like a vegetable. You'll find it roasted, sautéed, pureed into soups, mashed up for casseroles, breads, muffins, even pies. It's super versatile, but 1 cup of cooked butternut squash may have as much as 493 milligrams of potassium. That's a lot when you're trying to manage your potassium intake with CKD. Then there's another winter squash known as acorn squash. If you're eating it raw, it has around 485 milligrams of potassium per cup, but boiling it can lower its potassium content to 20 to 25%. One of the safest winter squash is spaghetti squash. It has only about 108 milligrams of potassium per 100 grams, which is a much safer choice for people with CKD. You can roast it, and when cooked, it shreds into these spaghetti-like strands that are great for replacing pasta or even in casseroles. Number 2. Swiss chard. Swiss chard is not just rich in potassium, but also in sodium, plus another thing that causes kidney stones. 1 cup of chopped boiled Swiss chard contains about 313 milligrams of sodium and a whopping 961 milligrams of potassium. While boiling does reduce the sodium content, but it seems to increase the potassium concentration. Swiss chard is also high in oxalates, up to 500 milligrams per half cup. For people who are prone to stones, especially calcium oxalate stones, avoiding high oxalate foods like Swiss chard is a good idea. Plus, high amounts of oxalates have also been shown to speed up the progression of kidney disease. So, it's best to avoid Swiss chard if you have CKD, kidney stones, or a history of kidney stones. If you're looking for a better low-potassium alternative to Swiss chard, your options could be mustard greens or turnip greens, which tend to have much lower potassium, sodium, and oxalate levels than Swiss chard. A cup of boiled mustard greens will give you about 226 milligrams of potassium, while a cup of boiled drained turnip greens pack about 292 milligrams of potassium. Number 3. Beets. They're among the richest sources of dietary nitrates that can help lower high blood pressure. But there's a downside for people with CKD. Beets pack about 442 milligrams of potassium per cup. And even though boiling can help reduce the potassium content somewhat, it doesn't affect the amount of oxalates in them. Beets are also high in oxalates, with about 152 milligrams per cup, which is a concern for both CKD patients and people with a history of kidney stones. Is there any alternative? Yes! Radishes are an excellent option. They're rich in nitrates, which means they can help bring your blood pressure down to a healthy range and prevent high blood pressure from damaging your kidneys further. Plus, radishes are low in potassium, containing only about 135 milligrams per cup, and they're very low in oxalates, making them much safer for both CKD patients and those prone to kidney stones. Number 4. Tomatoes. A raw medium-sized tomato contains about 292 milligrams of potassium. But when you cook or process tomatoes, the potassium content becomes more concentrated. For example, a cup of cooked tomatoes contains about 523 milligrams of potassium, and it gets even more intense with tomato sauce, which packs around 728 milligrams of potassium per cup. As the water evaporates during cooking or processing, the potassium becomes more concentrated in the final product. That's why items like tomato sauce or ketchup can contain even higher levels of potassium compared to raw tomatoes. Tomato sauce is found in some of the most popular foods, like pasta, pizza, and casseroles. When it comes to pizza, for example, A large pizza can typically have anywhere between half to quarter cup of tomato sauce, which could easily bring the potassium content of the sauce alone to 364 to 546 milligrams, which is undesirable if you're managing your potassium intake. So, what's the safe way to enjoy tomatoes if you have CKD? Moderation is key. For most CKD patients, it's safe to eat no more than 1 raw tomato or a half cup of cooked tomatoes per serving. If you're using tomato sauce, it's best to keep the serving size to less than a quarter cup. You can also opt for low potassium or no salt added versions of tomato products, which might help lower your overall potassium intake. Number 5. Potatoes. Potatoes are a staple in so many diets, but when it comes to kidney health, you've got to be careful. The amount of potassium in potatoes depends on how you cook them. For example, did you know that a serving of French fries may give you a whopping 892 milligrams of potassium? That's a huge amount for just 1 serving of fries. And baking potatoes doesn't help much either. A medium-baked potato with the skin on may have around 926 milligrams of potassium, which is still pretty high for anyone trying to keep their potassium levels in check. But there's a simple trick that can make potatoes a bit safer for CKD patients, and that's boiling. When you boil potatoes repeatedly and drain the water, you can cut down the potassium significantly. For example, a regular peeled and boiled potato contains about 490 milligrams of potassium, which is already better than a baked one. But if you double boil it, you can reduce the potassium even further to around 245 milligrams. That's a huge difference and can make potatoes much safer to eat in a kidney-friendly diet. Number 6. Spinach. A cup of boiled spinach contains a staggering 838 milligrams of potassium, which is way too high if you're trying to manage your potassium intake. And it's not just the potassium that's the problem. Spinach is also very high in oxalates, with about 755 milligrams in just half a cup. High oxalate levels can contribute to the formation of kidney stones, which is another reason to be cautious. But don't worry, there are great alternatives to spinach that are much more kidney-friendly. Cabbage, cauliflower, and broccoli are excellent options. They're much lower in potassium and oxalates than spinach, making them safer choices if you're trying to keep your kidneys healthy while still getting your greens. You can enjoy these veggies steamed, sautéed, or even raw in salads without the same level of concern that comes with spinach. Besides these veggies, watch out for these foods that may be silently damaging your kidneys.